Okay. All right, so I will get started. My name is Ed Keith. I work for Deschutes County as the county forester. And this meeting is just to give an overview of our grant opportunity that we have. This is the fourth year that we've offered this. It looks really similar to what we had last year, but I will just kind of provide an overview and maybe some hints as far as what we're looking for. We do score these, so we have kind of an objective way to compare grants, and so I'll kind of cover the categories that we use for scoring, so that you can make sure to focus on some of those for your grant application. Yeah, I'll just jump right, I guess I'll just dive right into it. If y'all have questions, feel free to raise a hand. We will have plenty of time for questions at the end as well. So if I don't cover something, I'll just be spending a few minutes here with my overview, and then the rest of the time will be discussion and questions. But feel free to raise a hand and or put something in the chat, and we'll make sure to get your questions answered. Okay, so hopefully you all have seen the announcement. Basically, it's 2 pages of introduction that kind of frames up some of what I'm going to cover today, and then 2 pages of the actual application. If you haven't found that yet, that's on our website, deschutes.org/grants. And you'll find there's just a couple documents on that page. So towards the bottom, you will find the document called Fuel Reduction Discretionary Grant Program. And this year we have, similar to last year, $100,000 of funding. That's funding that comes to Deschutes County through a discretionary fund through the Oregon Lottery, and the commissioners can prioritize those funds for different types of projects. And this is one that they have, luckily for us all, funded at a pretty reasonable, decent level. So we started this grant program 3 cycles ago, so this will be our 4th cycle. Second time where we had $100,000. We started with smaller than that, but we've demonstrated. You all have the demand for it. We had, I don't remember the exact number, but maybe $170,000 worth of requests. So we do have to prioritize or sometimes reduce some of the requests. I'm anticipating that we will probably likely not award any one community more than $5,000. And that's just because we have, this is not necessarily limited just to Firewise communities, but it's definitely aimed and prioritized for Firewise communities. We have had quite a increase in Firewise communities, and we're sitting at somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 communities. So not all of them apply. Some apply some years, some have never applied, but we do have a large number of communities, and so I don't anticipate that we would allocate more than $5,000 to any one community. A lot of our funding amounts were probably maybe half that last year. We had 33 awards, with that top end, but not all. They weren't all awarded the top end. So that's kind of what you can expect. I do want to be clear that this grant opportunity is for communities. So if you're an individual landowner, I can try to point you in the direction of other resources that may be available or periodically available. This one is really aimed at communities that are working together. So, our model for that here in Deschutes County is the national model of Firewise communities. You don't have to be fully through the process. So just to be clear, if you're getting started on that Firewise journey, but you haven't kind of been to the point of full recognition by the NFPA, that's okay. If you started maybe 4 or 5 years ago and still haven't got to that, I may be a little bit more concerned that you need to do some of that basic organizational stuff before you start to request funds. But yeah, if you're starting out on that process and have a good grasp of what you want to do, you can certainly apply for this to kind of get you going and started. So. So you've got to be communities, not individuals. The other thing is it does have to be related to fuels reduction. So as much as I might want to or like to fund like home retrofitting or things like that, the purposes for this particular grant do have to be fuel reduction. I would prefer to see, and we're definitely going to score grants higher that are focused on defensible space. And in particular, if you're in a community that has not achieved that kind of that 0 to 5 foot zone, or if you've kind of got that squared away and maybe working on the 5 to 30, but really trying to prioritize funding for the basics of defensible space. So as many homes as we can protect, but we really have to start at that foundation and work out when we're thinking about fuels reduction if we want to have homes that survive wildfire. So there's really going to be a definite preference for those that want to focus on that zone if you still have work to do in that 0 to 5 foot zone or the 5 to 30 foot zone. It's not to say that you can't work out from there. But if you're a community that's just getting started, especially, and you have work to do in the 0 to 5 foot zone, and you're planning, say, like treatment in your common areas 300 feet away from homes, it's probably not going to be necessarily a project that we're going to score as high as one that would be your community has shrubs right next to houses and you want to focus on that. So we do want you to focus on defensible space as much as there is work there for you to do. Let's see. The timeline, we'll be accepting, I have out there we will start to evaluate applications mid-September. So by September 16th, if you could submit those applications. If for some reason we didn't get the full request of that $100,000, we don't obligate that $100,000, we would still accept applications past that, but I wouldn't count on that. I would expect that we've never not been able to obligate that from our first cutoff. But as a worst case scenario, if we were still looking for funding, we would still accept a late application. But the ones that are received on time by that September 16th date will be the ones that will be considered first. One thing I want to be clear, I wasn't quite so firm on the last few years, but ran into so many problems of getting people money this last year. I was still working on trying to get checks out the door in April this year, and I really want to avoid some of the headaches with that, both for you and for me. So I am asking that if for Deschutes County to write you a check, we have to have a tax ID number. So if you're an HOA, that's usually pretty straightforward. But we do have some communities that are not an HOA. So be prepared to provide that tax ID number. And you probably don't want it to be your individual tax ID number because there may be tax implications with receiving those funds. We were able to track down some fiscal sponsors for people last year. And then we had a couple people actually form a new and go out and get a tax ID. But I would say, do that work now. If you need to do it, get a tax ID for your community and or find a fiscal sponsor. There's a few organizations that we worked with last year, and I do know that although we didn't work with them last year, the Upper Deschutes River communities for the south part of the county from south of Sun River, they have a specific geography that if you're within their footprint, they could potentially act as a fiscal sponsor. That just means that we pay that fiscal sponsor, they receive the funds and then disperse them to your expenses on your behalf. You would still be expected to do the full report. So after your project is done, we do ask you to do a report. It doesn't have to be anything too extravagant. We just want to be sure that since we do pay these funds in advance, there's a follow-up piece to make sure that yes, you did do your project, yes, you've accounted for all your costs, and just kind of an accountability piece there. So basically the way that works is that once we propose an award amount to each of you, you come back with sign an agreement saying, yep, we're on board, we're going to accept these funds, and we'll keep our records of how we spend these funds, and then provide you a report at the end. None of this is meant to be kind of piles and piles of paperwork. It's just enough so that we have those funds accounted for. Okay. So what do we look at? And I've covered a little bit of this, but I just want to be clear as far as what we're looking at when we look at these grant applications. First one being, are you a Firewise community, or are you working towards a Firewise community? So that's typically been about 20% of our score. So if it's pretty clear on the application, you're a Firewise site, or you started that process and maybe had an assessment but haven't quite finalized the process, or you have not done anything as far as Firewise. The second thing we look at is match. So that's another 20% of the scoring. We are looking to try to make these funds go as far as possible. And so communities that are either providing their own cash or volunteer time in the form of community members doing some of the work, we definitely favor those more than if you provide us a grant application where the only funds or match or there is no match, you're not likely to receive funds. So we want to be seeing some investment on behalf of the community that pools with these funds to help catalyze a good project. Match looks a lot different for each community. Some communities have that cash, but that's definitely not an expectation that you have cash match. A lot of other communities capture the time that the residents take to do this work, and that would include planning the project, not just executing the project, but actually planning the project and all the communications that it takes to get everybody on board. So that can just be an estimate. We just want to see how are you thinking of what the overall economics of the project look like. So we don't need you to set aside an exact dollar. Sometimes it's somewhat difficult to estimate exactly how much the community might participate, but a good estimate would be appreciated. Just showing that either people are going to be putting in hours or there is some money in your own budget to help pull off this project. The third piece, the next 20%, would be what the scope of the project is. So again, as I mentioned, if you're working, say, on commons areas or areas that are outside of that 100-foot defensible space zone, but you don't really have, you haven't really fully accomplished very good defensible space, those aren't going to score as well as ones that are focused on defensible space, and in particular, starting and focusing and making sure that 0 to 5 feet is really solid before you're moving out, because it really won't matter what you do out, 30, 50, 100 feet from the home if you still have flammable shrubs up next to the house. And I know a lot of communities still need to do some of that work. Where you don't have that, but you're still focused on defensible space, that's fine. If you're only working on common areas, that's going to score lower. It's not to say that you couldn't get funding, but it's not going to be as competitive as ones that are focused on defensible space. And then some of the other ones we do look at. We're hoping that this project helps you communicate with your community around wildfire risks, and there's maybe an education component around that. So not just doing the defensible space, but why you're doing the defensible space and what defensible space looks like. We're happy to share our defensible space brochure with you as part of any outreach effort. We have a lot of those printed, but if you could note, how you plan to get the whole community involved and kind of up to speed and educated around why they should be doing these fuel reduction projects in defensible space. That always looks great, just so that there's a perception, or not a perception, but an understanding across the whole community, and people are really getting on board. So any kind of education or outreach piece is 10% of the grant evaluation. Another one we look at is how much you're getting done versus how much you're asking for. So if you're asking for $5,000 and you're going to work on a couple, 3 properties, that's not going to be as competitive as you're asking for $5,000 and you're potentially working across 50 or 60 properties. I'm just throwing those numbers out as a kind of an example, but you don't necessarily have to think that you're going to get every single person in your community involved. But depending on the size of the community or the size of participation and the amount, we're definitely going to be comparing those across communities, and communities that are asking for a reasonable amount based on the number of properties or the number of acres or however other metric you want to propose. But we do want to see some efficiency in the use of the dollars as well. So just comparing the dollar request with what you're actually accomplishing will be looked at. And then the final 20% is, I guess, a kind of a potpourri of other considerations that we look at. And that would be, potentially a neighborhood that's particularly in a higher risk area, a community that is potentially underserved. There is actually now a map that the state has on the Oregon Wildfire Risk Explorer that helps us kind of identify different areas of the county that have disproportionately may not have as much financial resource or access to programs. They may have, maybe a lower income community, maybe elderly, higher proportion of disabled folks. So we would consider that if you want to call any of that out in your grant. We would also be looking at the probability of this project being done if outside of this funding. So if it's you were going to do this project anyway, but it would be sure nice to get some funds, versus we will not be able to accomplish this project if we don't get these funds, we would definitely consider that as well. And then just kind of generally the detail of the proposal. So, if there's a one sentence reply on each of the categories, and you don't give us a lot to go on, and we get another one that really kind of describes in pretty great detail how are you going to do this project, we will take that into consideration as well. So those are kind of the general things we're looking for as you're turning in applications. I did see, one question here in the chat. What records are necessary to prove use, and what is the time frame for use of the funds? Oh yeah, time frame for the use of the funds. We base everything here on a fiscal year. Our fiscal year starts in July and ends the end of June. So that's why we open these up in July. We've got a new budget. So our budget is approved now. and we run those through June. Most communities plan these for work in the spring, sometimes in timing with the fire-free dates, which are not set in stone, but always in the spring. So usually end of April, most of the month of May, and have been going into the first weekend in June for the rural areas. So you could feasibly potentially plan for a late fall project if you're responsive enough to get back your grant agreement and we can get you the payment. Otherwise, a lot of people plan these for the spring. You could do maybe a small project in the fall and another one in the spring too. But we hope to get all our grant reports back by the end of the fiscal year, so we have those funds accounted for. They were spent, and we can report back to the commissioners that of the work that was done. Okay. Specific examples of defensible space projects that add value to our grant application. Yeah, some of the most valuable accomplishments, it really depends on the community and how long you've been working on it. But a few of the projects that I really liked from last year did really focus on that 0 to 5 foot zone, removal of arborvitae, mugo pine, other flammable shrubs within that 0 to 5 foot zone. Those are, if you have that work to do, I would, we would definitely look at those pretty closely, and I would expect that we should provide some funding for those. Other ones, if you're kind of to the point where you've got that good, really solid 0 to 5 foot zone, but you're still creating or maintaining defensible space out of there, that focus on ladder fuels, so removal of flammable shrubs, pruning of trees, and or if needed, thinning of some smaller trees are always good projects. All the things that basically accomplish what we recommend you do in those 3 defensible space zones. So if your work is as much as that lines up with the work that is in your action plan that you should have if you're a Firewise community, definitely those are some of the projects. But yeah, removal of all flammable material within the first 5 feet, pruning of larger trees, thinning of smaller trees, removal of flammable brush in the 5 to 30 and 30 to 100 foot zone are all good projects. I know that a lot of you struggle to keep up with things like pine needles as regular maintenance, but honestly, that's I don't look at that so much as a project. That's just kind of your regular maintenance that you have to do on a kind of day in, day out basis as part of living in a fire adapted ecosystem. So if it looks more like kind of just general yard maintenance, those aren't going to score as good as kind of like, tree thinning, pruning, flammable shrub removal, and then kind of creating that non-flammable zone in the 0 to 5 foot area. So hope that gets at your question, Chris. So Diane is asking the scoring criteria. Sorry if I didn't get to 100%, but Firewise community, yes or no, has 20%. The amount of match is 20%. The scope of the project, as far as are you really focused on defensible space, is 20%. How efficient you are, so how much funds you're asking for versus what you're accomplishing, is 10%. An education or outreach with the entire community is another 10%, and then kind of the final one is 20%, and that's kind of a mix and match of all the other variables that you may want to include. So that's a little bit of kind of a discretionary category, but if there's something particular with your community that really stands out, as far as underserved or higher risk than another community, or likelihood of that project getting done without the funding, that would be that final 20%. So. Hopefully that adds up to 120, 40, 60, 80, 90, yeah, 100. Current rate for volunteer time. I don't know. Oh, sorry, I skipped one. Suzanne, let's see. Will we be checking to see if action plans are up to date? Yeah, usually I include Ross and Huffman from Oregon Department of Forestry, and usually a fire district representative or something similar. And between us, we are usually tracking who is currently up to date with all their FireWise requirements. So yes, we do check on that through the portal. And of course, this year is in progress, but if you're lapsed for some reason, which may include that your action plan is out of date, or you didn't complete your reporting, that's going to be in that first category there, as far as whether you're a FireWise community or not, and then what the actual status is. So if you were but you've lapsed, or you're not quite there, we do look at that. Yes. So Maureen is asking, or sorry, keep skipping. So the current rate for volunteer time. I usually just look it up at the national volunteer rate. Last I looked, it was like $29. But I will give you the amount. $29.95. Boy, that inflation is even volunteers are getting more expensive, right? So yeah, that was updated in April 2022, and I just go off of that. I don't know if FireWise is quite caught up to that or not, but I know that they benchmark their value off of that volunteer rate. I just don't know that they've updated that value yet, but you can use in your grant application, if you're trying to estimate the amount of hours your community might be investing in this project, just multiply that by $29.95. And if you don't do that, that's the value I will use if I see the amount of hours in your application. So, and then everybody's on an even playing field for that. So, yeah, Maureen was noting that in your application, it does calculate it for you. Yeah, okay. I think I'm caught up to the questions in the chat. I'm happy to take questions if you want to come off mute, or if you want to keep putting questions in the chat, or if we have no questions. I guess the only other thing I would need to tell you all is the submission of the applications. I have updated the form on the website to reflect this, but the application should actually be sent to a generic email box, which is, instead of my email, it's a pretty simple one, but it's forester@deschutes.org. So that'll make sure that we receive that. I will not be working here when these grant applications come due. My last day with Deschutes County will be the 15th. So if you can send your applications into that forester@deschutes.org, that'll be sure to be redirected to whomever is going to be reviewing these applications. Right.
I had a question or two. One of the things that I'm not sure I understood is the forward. Is there some forward paying? So if you do some work and yes.
Yes. Just so that everybody is kind of treated the same, we pay in advance. Actually, we pay all the projects in advance. So because I know that some communities are just not able to necessarily fund a significant project. They don't have that much in their bank account, or it's obligated to other obligations within their HOA. So yeah, as soon as I send you, or whoever would be sending you this grant agreement, it's just one page, you sign it, and if you get me that and a W-9 for who the check's made out to, we send you a check. So yes.
My second question was about the amount of time here that we have before writing the grant, September 16 being the summer vacation, people are in and out. And so I'm thinking, and I don't know if people here in this meeting have already done this kind of grant writing, but I feel that it's not going to be it's going to be a loose estimate, right?
Sure.
Of what we're, because there is no way I can get an exact estimate of how many people are going to be involved. Once we might get an idea that maybe, okay, 50 properties are wanting to be involved. And then as we do the project, there might be 60 that decide to want to do it. So is it okay if it is kind of a loose estimate?
Yes, definitely. Yes, yeah, that would be fine. The only thing that we really can't change is once we award you a certain amount of money, that's the money you get. So you'll have to work within that as your budget. But I totally understand that you're planning for a project that would potentially happen maybe even 6 months in advance. And estimates are completely fine. Have had communities come back to me and just if you have like dramatic changes in your project, just a little communication early on is always appreciated. But yeah, definitely. This is conceptual in nature. If you haven't done these before, if you're just looking, since his camera's on and I'm looking right there, if you're Dean Draben and you've done this for 20 years, you kind of have a pretty good feel for how many community members are going to participate and how many cubic yards. But if you're doing this for the first time in a brand new community, it's going to be more of an estimate. And that's completely fine. We want you to kind of have a place to start, and this is the way to do it. So don't feel like you have to kind of paint yourself into a corner or have an exact down to the penny amount. But as long as you can still work within the budget.
Right, because I'm also thinking about if we have to reach out to get an estimate from an arborist or a landscape company or somebody that would come and help, same thing, where we will not get the exact numbers probably.
Sure. Right. Yeah. I mean, as much as you can, as much as you know the specifics of what you want to do, if you can reach out to a few people and get some kind of estimate, that's great. Do the best you can.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Diane.
Hi, I had a question about, is it permissible to have residents do their project and then we look at what they've done. We make sure, if we want them to remove bark mulch and put rock in, and then we will give them a certain amount of money for doing that. So actually have the residents do the work, and then we are basically reimbursing, maybe a portion of that. Is that permissible?
Sure. I'll give you an example of one, just because I kind of work with them on trying to come up with a feasible way of them doing it. So it's had a community outside of Sisters that basically had maybe at least a third of their homes, maybe half of them, that still had lots of flammable shrubs next to their houses. She had a landscape tree service type company come in and just say, here's generally what these shrubs look like that we're going to target. Could you give me a feel for, like, per residence or per shrub, what the cost would be? And then that she based that on then basically putting a bounty on those shrubs and said, we will pay you $35 per medium-sized shrub and $70 per large overgrown shrub or something like that. And she took them on a first come first serve basis. How many shrubs do you have, to a maximum amount per homeowner of such and such $100 or something. And then they did the work. They could use the person that gave them the estimate or somebody else, and but just everybody received kind of a standardized amount based on how many shrubs or how much work they had. So that's just an example. But they did it kind of on they reimbursed their residents for a piece of that work that they had planned. So and there's a few other examples, but that's one that we did. Yeah.
Thank you.
And we just make the payment to the HOA, right? And then the HOA handled all the rest of it. So, and that's partially why we want to be working with communities. I don't have time to, I mean, this, this is, I have the estimated resident numbers for participation, but it's I want to say in the something thousands, so I wouldn't have time to necessarily work with 1,000+ residents on projects. And that's why I really appreciate you all being kind of the liaison between myself and your communities to help us reach the most amount of people possible.
Hey, Ed,
Yes.
if there are communities that are using other grant funds, what kind of influence does that have on this grant?
That's perfectly fine. Since this is not federal funding, which would then be much trickier. That will be that I can't imagine that we would run into any funding problems with that. If we were giving you federal funds, we would have to talk a lot more details. But these are not federal funds; these are kind of discretionary dollars, which makes these projects much more easier to pull off, honestly. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ed,
Yes.
that example you gave in Sun River is really something we've been wanting to do for a while. Is it possible to send in 2 grants? One to continue our defensible space projects, keying on that, and another to really try and thin out some of the trees, the thinner trees on certain properties that are really bordering the WUI, actually the forest land?
It's possible, yes. It would just be then we would have to, if you have we are going to definitely be, I anticipate at least that we would definitely be, not being able to fund every single project at their full request level. We've never been able to, we don't have as much funds as requests. Mm-hmm. So if you had a preference of which one you wanted to fund first, and or combine those into one grant application, you could do it however you want. We'll take, if it's a project that you're planning and it's fuel reduction, we'll take a look at it, but we are going to be scoring those and not being able to fund all of them. So we may be then deciding for you, if you don't say this is our number one priority and it would also be nice to do this other project if you have the funds. Let us know that, because otherwise we may fund one and not the other, and it may not be your highest priority. So if you decide to do 2, to just throw it out there with the hope that we have the funds, that's great. I would rather show the need, but the chances of both being funded versus not, I couldn't say until we get our request, but I would be surprised, just because of the demand for the dollars. Yeah.
If I wanted to do both projects, would I have to break down in the one application how much funding would go for each?
Sure. Yes.
We'd have to do that.
Yeah, and that would be great to have, and I assume that would be also useful for you in trying to plan and budget for things too. So yeah, that would be part of that budget section. Is like how do you expect to expend the funds in some sort of budget? That's question number 8. That's the last question on the form. So yeah.
Okay, thank you,
Suzanne.
Ed, I assume that none of us should be asking for more than $5,000. Is that correct?
I would say so. We had a couple of requests for more than that last year. we did fund one community at $6,000. I think they requested 10, if I recall, just off the top of my head. So you can request more. I'm just saying it's very unlikely that we would fund a project more than $5,000. I mean, that if we, yeah, and not everybody asks for that much. So you can ask for what you need, but try to be reasonable in that request, knowing that there are 70 Firewise communities that could potentially be applying for funds. I don't want to water it down so much that a few $100s doesn't really get a project going either. But I really don't see a scenario with the amount of Firewise communities we have now where we would be funding projects over $5,000. So there may be opportunities in the future, and I know Heather is on here. I don't know if there's any details that have been kind of fleshed out yet, but Oregon State Fire Marshals, for example, has and I probably will get the title wrong, but the Community Wildfire Risk Reduction Funds or something like that they're going to be releasing. I believe it's going to be in 2023 once the actual codes and requirements come out for Senate Bill 762. That may be a source for a larger project you want to do. I just don't have that level of funding, but so.
And just real quickly, I was not advocating for applying for more than 5. I was in response to Ray's comment. I just feel that to keep the playing field level for everybody, that if each one of us applies for one grant that does not exceed $5,000 would help keep the playing field level, but
Sure.
you know best. Thanks.
Yeah, well, yeah, it hasn't happened yet, so I doubt it would. But if we hit September 16th and we only have $70,000 worth of funding, that's not the great. We want to use these funds, so that's the only. But yeah, definitely, if we have $200,000 worth of requests, we will definitely have a cap on there, and we will have to look at all those components that I covered to try to potentially reduce the amount that we award to any one community. Yeah.
This might be a little bit out of the scope, but since, and I'm sorry to hear that you're leaving also, Ed, but since you will be leaving and Boone has left, who is going to be our contact then?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer for that. I just resigned yesterday and provided my 2 weeks notice, and I will be moving. And yeah, unfortunately, the person that we offered Boone's job to did not end up taking it. And I just don't have an answer for you at this time. I hope to have an answer before I leave. But I do not have an answer for that today. We might be at the end of our questions. You can always hit me up through email or a phone call. I can usually get back to emails quicker. Sometimes it's just easier for me to more quickly respond through email, but happy to take phone calls as well if you have a more complex situation you want to talk through. Definitely look me up before the 15th if you have questions, and I will try to get this posted to Project Wildfire's YouTube channel here shortly. So if you have others that you knew that couldn't make it but want to watch this video, we will have it posted here shortly. Anything else before we call it a morning?
No, thank you so much. It was really helpful and got a lot of information, and I'm sorry that we're not going to have any contacts anymore. So
yeah, I apologize for that. It's kind of it's gonna be a difficult time with the timing of this, but
will there be people there though to look at the applications?
We will have to figure that out. Yeah. It's usually been, the one person from Deschutes County and a couple cooperators, and I'm sure we can get the cooperators still on board. So there will be somebody from Deschutes County, but I just don't have the specifics. So we will. Yeah. Sorry, I don't have more answers. And I even thought about, canceling this meeting because I just don't have quite all the details of the transition because it just happened yesterday. But we'll try to get it figured out so that you're not kind of left hanging. So apologize for that. And I really have really appreciated working with y'all. You guys are really the key for communities doing things, and we're just here to help you out. And so really do appreciate all the work that you put in to make your community safer. It makes all the difference in the world.
Thank you. And thank you for your time too.
Miss you.
Good luck on your next move.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
Ed.
Okay.
Bye.